and welcome. You found your way to a quiet place, a space for wandering thoughts, distant histories, and slow, immersive stories meant not to stir, but to settle. Tonight, we're stepping gently into the past, not through the triumphant arches or golden villas of ancient Rome, but down the narrow, uneven streets, into the shadows cast by towering wooden buildings, and into the cramped quarters of a world most people never write poems about. Because while the glory of Rome is often bathed in golden sunlight, history lived most of its days in the shade in the ordinary, uncomfortable, and sometimes unbearable lives of people you'll never see on a coin. Tonight, we begin in a Roman insula, a tenement block so familiar to the average Roman that the grandeur of the Forum might have felt as distant to them as it does to us. We'll walk those creaky stairs, hear the neighbor's footsteps above you, smell the meals you didn't order, and perhaps, by the end, find a certain strange comfort in the chaos of a world that was difficult, but deeply human. So if you're ready, settle in, adjust your blanket, and let the noise of the modern world fall away. Imagine yourself waking just before dawn, not to the hum of an alarm clock, but to the scratch of rats behind the wall and the steady thud of feet climbing wooden stairs overhead. You're on the third or perhaps fourth floor of a Roman insula. The air is close, humid, thick with the scent of oil smoke, mildew, and a dozen different meals cooked too close together. These tenements, built tall and fast to house the city's working poor, groaned with age even when they were new. If you're lucky, your room has a tiny window, but it's shuttered to keep out the dust and the smell. The light you rise to is dim, slanting between wooden slats like watery threads of mourning. You roll from a straw mattress. No blanket, just your tunic, slightly damp from the sweat of the night before. You slept beside your brother, your cousin. Maybe a friend. Rooms here are small, shared, and never truly silent. Above, a baby cries. Below, someone is vomiting into a clay pot. The walls are thin. You hear everything. Outside your door, a rickety stairway leans precariously into the outer alley. There is no hallway, no railing, just open air and a straight fall into the courtyard below. Fires are a constant fear. One careless spark from a cooking brazier, and the whole block could go up in smoke. It has happened before. People rarely escape. You clutch your sandals and step carefully. The wood creaks under your weight. You've memorized which boards shift and which ones hold. The climb down is quick, and not without the smell of latrine wafting from the nearby cesspit. The public toilet is 3 streets away, and rarely used by those above the second floor. Chamber pots, emptied over balconies, are the norm. Don't forget to look up Even the cleanest Roman neighborhoods deal with constant refuse, slop buckets, spoiled food, sometimes worse. A few steps from your door, a vendor is already warming yesterday's fish. The fire pops gently, and the scent, well, it tells you all you need to know about how old the catch was. Still, if you're hungry enough, it'll do. The street is loud. Wheels on stone, barking dogs, the occasional shout in Latin or Greek. You nod to the baker's son, who's been up since before you. His father's shop has an oven, a shared luxury. Sometimes, you pay him a little to let your family's dough bake alongside theirs. Bathing. That's a rare pleasure. The public baths cost a few coins, and most people only go once or twice a week. Instead, you wipe down with a wet cloth if you have one, or splash water from a shared jug. Your feet are always dusty, your hands rough. And yet, life continues. You make your way to the Forum, or the market, or the docks, depending on your trade. You might be a scribe's assistant, a basket weaver, a porter, or just looking for odd jobs. The labor is hard, the hours are long, but you do it again, and again, and again. Lunch is small, a piece of bread, maybe olives. If you've done well, a bit of cheese or dried fruit, you eat quickly, sitting on a step or the corner of a fountain. There's no leisure here, just rhythm. When you return home that evening, it's hot. The upper floors trap heat like a kiln. The sun has passed, but the walls still radiate warmth. You sit near the window, if you can. Watch the other buildings, all packed together in uneven rows. Lamps flicker behind shutters. Voices murmur. A lute plays somewhere. A couple argues on the floor below. This is your Rome, not marble and myth, but sweat and survival. And yet, in the quiet moments, there is beauty. A neighbor shares wine. A child sings to herself while feeding a pigeon. A cooling breeze dances through a window just wide enough to catch it. These things small, nearly forgettable, make it worth enduring another day. As the night deepens, you lie back down. The walls creak again. The rats scratch. The wood above you groans beneath the footsteps of someone heading to the roof. You don't sleep well. You never do. But you sleep just enough to rise again tomorrow. And so the rhythm of their lives went on, uncelebrated, unseen, but deeply real. Let us now drift upward, away from the crowded tenements of the Roman poor, up the Palatine Hill, where the city's elite lived among gardens, marble courtyards, and rooms perfumed with crushed herbs. It's here, in these quiet halls of wealth and whisper, that Agrippina the Younger once walked, cloaked not only in silk, but in ambition. Agrippina was born into privilege but not peace. She was the daughter of Germanicus, a beloved general, and Agrippina the Elder, herself descended from the Emperor Augustus. Her bloodline was golden, but golden blood often spills too easily in Rome. She was just a child when her father died under mysterious circumstances, possibly poisoned on imperial orders, and her mother, outspoken and proud, would later be exiled and starved to death by the emperor she had once defied. So Agrippina learned early that Rome's love was a fragile thing, and power was not given, but taken. As a young woman, she was married off first to a cousin, then to a consul. These were alliances, not romances. In those early years, she bore a son. His name was Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. The world would later know him as Nero. But we'll come back to him. Agrippina's life was shaped by the emperors of her time. First Tiberius, then the wild and dangerous Caligula, her own brother. Under his rule, she walked a delicate line. He could be generous, then cruel, then generous again, all in the same afternoon. When she fell out of favor, she was exiled. Her survival during this period may have come down to silence and waiting. And she waited well. After Caligula's assassination, the new Emperor Claudius, an uncle she knew well, recalled her to Rome. And here, the tide turned. Claudius was older, more scholarly than fierce. He was also manipulable. Agrippina, now widowed again, used her charm, her lineage, and perhaps a gentle nudge of suggestion to become his fourth wife. It was a bold move. Roman law frowned on uncles marrying nieces, but exceptions could be made for the imperial family. And Agrippina, skilled in image and subtlety, made sure it was seen as both noble and necessary. Once empress, she moved quickly. Her son, Nero, was adopted by Claudius. That meant legitimacy. In the eyes of Rome, Nero was now an heir. It is said she built a golden corridor from her private quarters to the emperor's so she could advise him more efficiently. Others whispered darker things, that she controlled his decisions, that she silenced rivals, that she poisoned Claudius's former wife, and even Claudius himself when Nero came of age. There's no proof, but there is pattern. When Claudius died suddenly, and after a curious dish of mushrooms, Nero ascended the throne at just 16 years old, his mother stood beside him, cloaked in mourning and triumph all at once. For a time, she ruled through him. Coins were minted bearing her image opposite his. Her face appeared on arches, her name whispered in court, her decisions implemented quietly by Nero's advisors. She had done what no Roman woman had done before, grasped real political power in a world that pretended women could not hold it. But sons grow restless, especially emperors. As Nero matured, he grew less willing to be his mother's puppet. He fell in love with a woman Agrippina disliked. He surrounded himself with new advisors, and slowly, deliberately, he began to edge her out. First, her guards were reassigned. Then, her influence over policy waned. Finally, he ordered her out of the palace altogether. She was given her own villa, her own staff, but her voice no longer echoed in the marble halls of power. Still, she watched. She waited. Some say she plotted. Others say she simply refused to disappear. And so, the emperor made a decision. One version of the story tells of a boat cleverly rigged to collapse beneath her in the bay. Agrippina survived the fall, swimming through the dark water to shore, undeterred. Nero sent men to finish the job more directly. When they arrived at her villa, she is said to have bared her stomach and told them to strike her womb first, the place that had borne the emperor, now ordering her death. Whether that final detail is true or legend, Agrippina's life ended in violence, as so many did in imperial Rome, but her legacy endured. She had risen from a girl marked by tragedy to the most powerful woman in the empire. She had shaped emperors, defied tradition, and carved her name into a history that never wanted to remember women for their power. Even now, her memory lingers in marble busts, old scrolls, and the shadowy corners of Roman history, both admired and condemned, but never forgotten. And so we leave her here, her footsteps fading from the mosaic floors, her story a whisper in the corridors of time. Let us turn now from palaces and politics and walk slowly down a much quieter path. The year is 79 CE. The month is likely August, and the people of Pompeii, bakers, merchants, priests, slaves, children wake to the hum of ordinary life. The sun warms their stone streets. The fountains bubble in familiar corners. Life is loud, fragrant, layered. And then, in an instant, it is still. Pompeii is often remembered for its sudden end, but before the ash, there was rhythm. There were meals cooked, bread sold, prayers whispered, arguments had. The beauty of Pompeii lies not in its destruction, but in its preservation. A city frozen, not at its finest hour, but at its most real. Imagine yourself walking those streets today, not as a tourist, but as a quiet observer, drifting gently through the past. The road beneath your feet is paved in dark volcanic stone, worn smooth by centuries of cartwheels. High stepping stones allow you to cross without sinking into the rainwater or waste that flows along the gutters. Every detail was practical, lived in. To your left, a thermopolium, the ancient Roman equivalent of a fast food shop. Clay jars embedded in the counter once held lentils, meat stew, perhaps even mulled wine. The counter is chipped, painted with faded images of ducks, figs, and olives. You can almost smell the spice still clinging to the walls. Farther on, a bakery. You peek inside to find the oven still standing, its rounded back blackened with old soot. Stone mills, shaped like hourglasses, were turned by donkeys to grind grain. In one room, they found loaves of bread, carbonized by heat still holding their shape after 2,000 years, a moment preserved between kneading and biting. The houses are open now. The walls have long since lost their privacy, but in their silence they speak volumes. You enter the House of the Faun, named for a small bronze statue still dancing in its atrium. Mosaic floors greet you tesserae arranged in quiet elegance. One scene depicts Alexander the Great in battle, another shows wild animals mid-motion. The rooms around you are cool, spacious. This was the home of the wealthy. But wealth did not matter that day. Across town, the House of the Veti reveals another story. Its painted walls still glow faintly with reds and ochres scenes of mythology, pleasure, and power. The ceiling is open to the sky. A small pool in the center of the atrium collects water, both ornamental and functional. The echo of dripping rain would have filled this space once, gentle and rhythmic. And as you walk deeper into the city, you begin to notice the ordinary details the graffiti scratched into walls. Some crude, some poetic. Messages left by citizens: I was here. Vote for Marcus. Flora loves Severus. 1,000 small voices murmuring across time. You pass a brothel where carved beds still remain in, and frescoes depict the services once offered. Above one doorway, a phallic charm hangs, a symbol of luck and fertility. These were not secrets in Roman life, merely facts of survival and commerce. You drift through a bathhouse where heated floors once warmed marble rooms. You imagine the steam, the soft murmurs of conversation, the echo of dripping water. These were not just places to clean the body, but to speak, socialize, and scheme. The plaster still shows signs of decorative stucco scenes of sea nymphs and dolphins, gentle and dreamlike. And then the moment. On that warm summer day, the ground trembled, but this was not new. The people of Pompeii had felt tremors before. They did not know that Mount Vesuvius, looming in the distance, was not a mountain, but a volcano dormant. Yes, but waiting. The eruption began in the late morning. A great column of smoke and ash burst skyward, visible for miles. Pumice rained down, light at first, then heavy. Roofs collapsed under its weight. Some people fled, others stayed, believing it would pass. By nightfall, toxic gases poured through the streets. Ash drifted in waves, burying bodies, shops, lives. It was not a firestorm, it was silence descending. And in that silence, something remarkable happened. The very thing that destroyed Pompeii also protected it, covered in meters of ash. The city escaped the ravages of time. No looting, no rebuilding, just preservation. When archaeologists first began to uncover it in the 18th century, they found streets exactly where they had been. Furniture still standing, jewelry in drawers, shadows of people. Their final postures immortalized in ash. Some curled under staircases, others clutched loved ones. A few appeared to be praying. Their stories are unknown, but their presence is undeniable. And so we walk among ghosts. Pompeii offers no grand battles, no emperor's speeches, no conquest, but in its quiet stillness, we find something richer texture, breath, the rhythm of daily life cut short. It is the most human of ruins. And as we gently leave its streets behind, stepping once more into the present, we carry a little of its stillness with us. Because sometimes, in the quietest places, history whispers the loudest. As we leave the quiet ruins of Pompeii behind, we rise once more up the polished staircases of the Roman elite into villas walled with marble, cooled by trickling fountains, and filled with the heady scent of crushed herbs, incense, and roasted meats. Here, in these open courtyards and shaded dining rooms, the rhythm of Roman life took on a different pace, leisurely, luxurious, almost ritualistic. To dine with an emperor or even a well-placed senator was not simply to eat. It was to perform, to observe hierarchy, to understand your place, and perhaps to try to rise from it. And let's begin at dusk. You've been invited to a convivium, a formal dinner, usually held in the late afternoon or early evening. The host is wealthy. His domus is located on the Palatine Hill, perhaps, with a view that stretches over tiled rooftops and distant aqueducts. Servants lead you inside, past polished columns and flickering oil lamps, and you remove your sandals, clean your hands with scented water poured from silver jug, and then, slowly, you recline not at a table, but on a couch arranged around a low dining platform. This is how Roman elites dined on their sides, propped on cushions, feet angled away from the food. Conversation begins gently. Whispers, toasts. There's a rhythm to it all. And breaking that rhythm, even by reaching too early for a fig, might earn you a raised eyebrow, or worse. The meal unfolds in courses. Not simply starter, main, farci, and dessert, but multiple acts of a culinary performance. The first course, the gustatio, is designed to awaken the appetite. You're offered olives, some plain, others soaked in honey or spiced wine, small dishes of pickled vegetables, salted fish, and eggs with pine nuts appear, each one served by a silent attendant. The flavors are often unexpected sweet, mingled with salty, sour with rich. Roman cuisine prized contrast and surprise. Then comes the prima mensa, the main course. This is where opulence shines. Imagine a whole roast peacock, its feathers reattached after cooking for visual splendor, or dormice, delicately stuffed with nuts and herbs. Perhaps a dish of boiled ostrich, or wild boar in a reduction of wine and date syrup. One infamous delicacy was garum, a fermented fish sauce poured over nearly everything. The scent was sharp, almost briny. Today, it might seem unpleasant. Then, it was a sign of taste and money. For the truly extravagant, rare ingredients were a symbol of power. Flamingo tongues, jellyfish, even lion meat, according to some sources, though that may have been more legend than reality. It's worth noting that not all of it tasted good. That wasn't the point. What mattered was rarity, novelty, theater. Wine flows freely throughout, but never undiluted. Romans considered drinking pure wine barbaric. Instead, they mixed it with water, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes infused with flowers or herbs. And always, there were rules. The seating order reflected your social rank. The best spot on the couch, called the locus consularis, went to the most honored guest. Speaking too loudly, laughing at the wrong moment, or spilling food might mark you as unsophisticated. Still, the atmosphere could grow loose as the evening wore on. After enough wine, tongues relaxed. Musicians might play the lyre. A poet might recite a verse. Dancers entered, veiled in silk. The tone shifted from formality to indulgence. And then the secunda mensa, the final course, not quite dessert as we know it, but a chance to linger. Dried fruits, honey cakes, almonds glazed in wine, occasionally cheeses or chilled melon. Sweet wines appeared, thicker, darker, more syrupy. Laughter softened. The lamps glowed lower. In some cases, guests were expected to vomit mid-meal discreetly. Of course, in order to continue eating, Roman moralists frowned upon this practice, but it was not uncommon at the most lavish banquets. The body was secondary to the performance of abundance. Emperors themselves were known to host extraordinary feasts. Nero once staged a floating banquet on a man-made lake, complete with mechanical ceilings that sprinkled rose petals and perfume onto guests. Caligula served food dusted with gold flakes. Domitian required his guests to dine in total silence under black drapes, as though attending their own funerals just to unsettle them. But not every evening was strange. Some were simply refined. A few friends gathered over figs and honey wine, watching the moon rise above the rooftops. Cicero once wrote of such evenings, where the talk drifted from politics to philosophy and back again, and the food was merely the setting for thought. As you recline here, the room slows, the oil lamps sputter gently, The conversation trails off. The final notes of the flute fade into quiet. You've eaten not just a meal, but a symbol, a performance of wealth, intellect, and status. In Rome, to dine well was to live well, and to show the world that you belonged. Eventually, the slaves return, silent as shadows, to clear the remains. The couches are fluffed. The wine is capped. Outside, the city grows quiet. You gather your cloak, thank your host, and step back into the night, perhaps unsteady, perhaps thoughtful, always observed. And the elite world of Roman dining was a mirror of the empire itself, layered, grand, complex, and but beneath the gold leaf, deeply human. You've arrived at a quiet corner of time, a place where distant centuries drift softly across your thoughts, and the clamor of the modern world can gently fall away. Here, history unfolds not in battles and horns, but in the steady rhythm of daily life, in forgotten hands, quiet footsteps, and fires that burned low through long, cold nights. Tonight, we travel north, far north, to the icy fjords and smoky halls of the Viking Age, but not into the boots of heroes or raiders. Tonight, we walk in simpler shoes, calloused feet, if any shoes at all. Oh. Because the Norse world, for all its sagas and swordplay, was built on the backs of many whose names were never carved into stone. People who cooked the food, chopped the wood, milked the goats, and sometimes were the food. This is the story of the Viking thralls, the enslaved, the overlooked, the expendable. But in their struggle, we find a strange kind of humanity, quiet strength, resilience, and a deeper understanding of the world the sagas never quite told. So if you're ready, breathe slowly. Let the candlelight of your imagination flicker low, and come with me into the cold, into the dark, into the quiet past. Imagine waking before the sun. The fire in the longhouse has burned low overnight, and the chill bites at your skin before your eyes even open. There's no blanket, just a thin animal skin, damp with your own breath and the sweat of nearby sleepers. You're not family. You don't even have a name here, not really. You're a thrall. Property. A servant, perhaps. A slave, more truthfully. And today will be just like the day before it. You rise quietly, not because you choose to, but because your back still remembers the last time you were late. The master doesn't often strike hard, but he doesn't have to. His children are cruel enough for him. Your first task is to feed the hearth stack wood, blow gently on embers, bring the flames to life so others may rise to warmth. The smoke curls upward through the roof's smoke hole, mixing with the distant cries of gulls and the muffled howl of wind over the hills. If there's bread from yesterday, you eat the edge of it. If not, you sip the whey left from cheese making. A sour taste, but it warms the throat. The longhouse is still mostly dark, but the day is not. Chores begin whether the sun cooperates or not. You carry buckets to the well, but you help grind grain with aching arms. If the goats have calved, you check on them. If they haven't, you clean the muck anyway. And if there's a trip to the river, you're the one who makes it. The hours pass slowly. There is no sword in your hand, no silver on your wrist. The warriors boast of raids, drink thick mead, polish axes. You chop wood for their fires, wash their cloaks, sharpen their blades when they're too drunk to do it themselves. The days blur. Sometimes you're given a task indoors, weaving, spinning, curing hides tedious, but warm. Other times, you're sent to help the blacksmith or repair fences along the icy fields. The wind cuts deep in winter, and the wet seeps into your bones. But the work cannot wait. The cows must eat. The fences must hold. The masters must be pleased. At night, the house fills with smoke and noise. Stories are told half sung, half boasted. The warriors speak of gods and monsters, of far-off islands and buried treasure. You sit quietly, never too close to the hearth, always just beyond the glow. If you're lucky, you'll get the scraps of roasted meat or the leftover gruel from the pot's bottom. If you're not, you'll lie down hungry. Some thralls were born into this, others were captured during raids, or taken in tribute. You might once have had a home, a language, a mother's voice. But those are dreams now. Here, you are a shadow on someone else's wall, and sometimes you dream of escape. But where would you go? The mountains are cruel, the forests silent, and the sea, well, the sea eats the brave and the foolish alike. Some are freed, it's said, if you serve well, if the master dies kindly, if you catch the eye of someone powerful. But freedom is rare, and when it comes, it's never quite full. You hear stories, now and then, of thralls sacrificed at funerals bound and buried beside their masters to serve them in the afterlife, or worse, hung from trees as offerings to Odin or Frey. You wonder, in your quietest moments, if death would be a release, or just more service. And yet, there is still life here. The goat bleats when you feed her. The fire crackles in response to your careful stacking. A child, not yet old enough to hate, smiles at you in passing, and the stars, when the clouds part, are as sharp and wide and eternal for you as they are for kings. You do not carry a name in the sagas. No stone will mark your passing, but you carried water when no one else would. You kept the fires burning when others feasted. You survived when so much around you demanded that you disappear. And in that, there is something greater than glory. There is endurance. And so the rhythm of your life continues quiet, cold, often cruel, but never entirely broken. Now let us shift our gaze from the smoke-dark rafters of the thrall's longhouse to the wind-whipped sea. Imagine yourself standing on the rocky edge of a fjord in western Iceland. The cold air stings the back of your throat. Salt rides on the wind, and there, just ahead, is a man with red hair that catches the light like fire. His boots are thick with earth. His hand grips the hilt of an axe, not with threat, but with habit. This is Erik Thorvaldsson. You'll come to know him as Erik the Red. His life, like the sea, was restless, shifting, often violent, but behind the boldness, there was something else: exile, loss, ambition, and the search for a place to finally belong. Erik was born in Norway, around 950 CE, in the icy mountainous region of Rogaland. But trouble seemed to follow his family even before his own story began. His father, Thorvald, was accused of murder and fled to Iceland, a land still wild and young, dotted with farms and long memories. There, Erik grew up in the rough traditions of the Norse frontier, farming by necessity, raiding when needed, arguments solved not by courts, but by steel. He married a woman named Theodilda, built a farm of his own, and like his father before him, he soon found himself in trouble. The sources are scattered like pieces of a broken saga, but we know this Erik quarreled with his neighbors, over land, over property, over pride. Axes were drawn, blood was spilled, men died, and Erik was outlawed, banished from Iceland for 3 years. Being outlawed in Norse law was not a symbolic gesture. It meant you were outside protection. Anyone could kill you without penalty. You lost home, kin, honor. So Erik gathered his household, some friends, and supplies. He took to the sea. According to the sagas, he had heard of a distant land to the west, sighted by a Norseman blown off course years before. A green land, they said, though unproven. And so, in exile, Erik sailed westward and found it. What he discovered was vast, rugged, cold, but promising. Glaciers loomed inland, but the coastal fjords were rich in fish and seal. He explored, named landmarks, marked the land with his presence. And when his exile ended, he returned to Iceland with a plan. He called the land Greenland, a clever name, meant to entice. If the place was to be settled, it needed settlers. And if it was to be remembered, it needed stories. In 985 CE, Eric led a fleet of 25 ships across the sea to Greenland. Storms swallowed many. Only 14 arrived. The rest were lost to the depths. But those who made it laid the first stones of Norse Greenland. They built farms on the edges of habitable land, raised sheep and goats, traded ivory from walrus tusks. Eric claimed the best land for himself, establishing the Brattahlid settlement near modern-day Kassiarsuk. He ruled not as a king, but as a chieftain respected, feared, and quietly resented. Perhaps Greenland was isolated. The winters were long, the soil thin. The line between success and starvation was as narrow as the blade of a knife. Still, life persisted. Eric and his wife had several children. The most famous among them was Leif Erikson, who would, in time, sail even farther west and glimpse the shores of North America. But that story is for another time. Despite his boldness and drive, Eric's later years were not peaceful. When Christianity began to spread through the Norse world, his wife converted. She refused to share his bed afterward, building a separate church beside their home. Eric, it seems, resisted the new faith, held to the old gods. Perhaps he saw change as a slow betrayal of tradition, of identity, of himself. Toward the end of his life, Eric attempted to sail with Leif to explore new lands, but he fell from his horse on the way to the ship of bad omen. They believed he stayed behind. And shortly after, he died. Not in battle, not in glory, but quietly, perhaps from illness, or simply age. His burial site is unknown, his body likely laid beneath stone, lost to time and snow. What remains is the ripple of a man who, in exile, sought a new world, who named a frozen land green not because it was, but because it needed to be, who fathered explorers, built farms on ice, and left behind more questions than answers. Was he a visionary, or just a stubborn outlaw, a leader, or a danger? The sagas paint him in strokes of admiration and caution. What we do know is this: he chased the edge of the map, and for a time, he stood there, facing a cold wind, carving a life out of stone and snow. Now, let us set aside ships and axes, farms and feasts. Let us walk softly into a darker corner of the Norse world, a place filled with symbols carved in bone, whispers cast into the wind, and truths glimpsed through fire and blood. This is not the world of warriors or kings, but of seers, of omens, of fate. Magic, for the Norse, was not illusion. It was not trickery. It was power real, dangerous, and unpredictable. It moved quietly beneath the surface of everyday life, like a river beneath the ice. You feel it in the hush before a storm, in the way the ravens circle the longhouse roof, in the dreams that return again and again. Start first with the runes. Imagine a smooth piece of wood in your hand. It's been carefully sanded, its edges soft. On it, a symbol perhaps like an angular F or a sharp R. These are not letters, exactly. They are runes. Each one holds sound, meaning, mystery. The Norse carved runes not only into stones and memorials, but into their tools, their weapons, their bones. A simple knife might bear the rune for protection. A gravestone might sing the name of the fallen. A message passed between lovers might carry a rune for longing. The runic alphabet, known as the futhark, wasn't merely a system of writing, it was a gateway. Some believed that by arranging runes in the right order, one could influence fate itself. There are tales of runes used to heal and others to harm. Love runes, death runes, binding spells scratched into bark or scratched into the skin. And those who knew these things best were the Veolur seeresses, wandering women who carried staffs, wore cloaks of feathers, and saw what others could not. To witness a cider ritual, you'd have to follow the flicker of a torchlight into a clearing at night. The air is cold. Pine branches creak overhead. A circle of stones surrounds the seeress. Her voice rises slowly, chanting in a language older than memory. Around her, others echo the rhythm. Drums thump softly, like a heartbeat. She rocks gently, enters a trance. And then, through her lips, the gods speak. Perhaps Odin, the Allfather, who gave one of his eyes to drink from the well of wisdom. Or perhaps Freyja, who taught Satyr to the Aesir, the gods of sky and storm. The seeress might speak of harvests, of war, of a child not yet born. Her words are often vague, layered in metaphor, but they are taken seriously. To know too much was dangerous. Even Odin, the wisest of gods, paid dearly for his knowledge. In one tale, he hung himself from the great world tree, Yggdrasil, for 9 nights pierced by a spear to learn the secrets of the runes. He gave up breath to gain wisdom. And so the Norse saw fate not as something easily bent, but as a thread woven by the Norns' 3 mystical women who lived beneath Yggdrasil's roots. One spun the thread, one measured it, one cut it. The gods themselves feared the Norns. Their power was absolute. Even Thor, with his mighty hammer, could not deflect what was destined. But that didn't stop people from trying. Some buried animal bones beneath the threshold of a house to protect against spirits. Others hung Thor's hammers carved from stone over the cradle of a newborn. Warriors wore amulets of iron or antler, whispering names to the wind before battle. And then there were the dead. Norse burial rituals were rich with magic and belief. The dead were not simply laid to rest, they were sent on a journey. Some were burned in boats, their ashes scattered across the waves. Others were buried with weapons, food, and tokens for the next world. Sometimes slaves or animals were killed to accompany them a grim offering, meant to ease the transition. The most honored dead might become Draugr undead spirits who walked at night, guarding treasure or punishing the unworthy. Tales of the Draugr kept people respectful of the dead and fearful of disturbing their rest. But not all spirits were feared. Many Norse homes honored household spirits, Landvater, protectors of land and luck. These beings lived in hills, rivers, trees. If treated well, they brought fortune. If offended, misfortune followed. Travelers left offerings at sacred stones. Farmers whispered thanks to the fields. To live in the Norse world was to live with the unseen. Magic was not confined to temples or sorcerers. It was in the way you tied your boots, the charms you carried, the silence you kept during a thunderstorm. It was in the rhythm of life itself, of seasons, of breath. And though Christianity would later sweep across the Norse world, many of these beliefs remained quietly, beneath the surface, blended into new rituals, muted, but not forgotten. Even now, on certain windswept shores of Iceland or Norway, you may find small piles of stones, offerings to spirits no one remembers by name, but who still might be watching. So as we leave the world of Viking magic, we do so with soft footsteps, careful not to disturb the runes carved long ago. Some things, after all, were never meant to be fully understood. Now, Let us rise again from the shadows of bones and spirits, into the flickering warmth of firelight, mead, and music. Our path now winds toward the longhouse, not the dark corner where thralls worked in silence, but the high seat, where warriors and jarls held court. This is where honor lived, or at least where it was most often performed. The elite of Viking society chieftain, seasoned warriors, landowners, respected traders gathered not only to govern or to plan raids, but to feast and to tell stories that bent memory toward glory. Step into one of these great halls. It is long, narrow, and built of timber. Smoke rises slowly through a vent in the roof. The air is warm, thick with the mingled smells of roasted meat, burning wood, and damp wool. At the far end is the high seat, a carved chair flanked by posts bearing animal heads or twisted designs. This is where the chieftain or honored guest sits. Others recline along the walls, seated in order of rank. Outside, the land may be hard, but in here, there is bounty. The evening begins with quiet ceremony. A drinking horn is filled with mead, thick, golden, sweet from fermented honey. It is passed around the hall, and with it, words are spoken. Toast to the gods, to ancestors, to those who did not return from the last voyage. These are not just drinks, they are small rituals, acts of remembrance, of belonging. Then the feast begins. Bowls of stewed lamb, platters of fish caught from nearby rivers, bread made from barley, coarse and hearty, cheeses, dried fruits, onions, and sometimes even fresh greens during the short summers. The food is rich, if not always varied, and the portions generous, especially for those of high status. Eating well was not just survival, it was a statement, proof of strength, of success, of one's rightful place. But food was only the first part of the performance. After the bellies were full and the mead had softened voices, came the stories. The skald, or poet, stood with reverence. In verse, he recited deeds of old, of heroes who slew giants, of ships that split the sea, of battles won by cunning or courage. These poems, often memorized for years, held the values of the Viking world: bravery, loyalty, reputation, and the listeners, warmed by drink and fire, would nod, murmur approval, or add tales of their own. These halls were not merely places of merriment. They were where identity was forged, where the warrior elite reminded each other who they were and who they hoped to be remembered as. But beneath the cheer, always the presence of death. To be a warrior was to live close to the edge. Raids were planned at these very tables, long voyages to Ireland, Francia, England, and beyond. Not all would return. And so, Valhalla. This was the imagined reward, a great hall in the afterlife, ruled by Odin, where the bravest warriors fought by day and feasted by night. It was a paradise built on the same values as these earthly halls: glory, combat, camaraderie. In Valhalla, it was said, the warriors' wounds healed each evening. The meat was endless, carved from the magical beast Sarimnir, which was reborn every day. And the mead flowed from the udders of a goat that grazed upon the leaves of Yggdrasil. Strange, perhaps, but to a Viking warrior, it made perfect sense. To die in battle was not failure, it was the beginning of something greater. A seat at Odin's table, an eternal role in the great cosmic drama. Still, even the warrior elite were human. They quarreled, they aged, they feared betrayal and sickness. They carried charms like any farmer, consulted seers, loved their children, watched the stars with quiet wonder. They did not live in Valhalla yet. They lived here in this cold, uncertain world, where storms could shatter ships and kings could fall as quickly as they rose. And so they built their halls strong, Their alliance is stronger. They carve their names into stones and their stories into the minds of those who would listen. As you recline now, beside the imagined hearth of that longhouse, you might feel the rhythm of it all. The pulse of speech, the crackle of logs, the clink of a bronze cup set gently on the table. Life in the Viking elite was more than battle. It was ritual, repetition, legacy. A feast was never just a meal, it was a memory in the making. And when the fire burned low, and the warriors slipped into slumber, some with swords still in hand, the longhouse fell quiet again. The night settled, and for a time, even the boldest men rested in peace. And now, the fire is burned low. The longhouse is quiet. Outside, the wind hums through pine and stone, and the stars, like old eyes, watch silently from above. We have wandered far this evening. From the silent burdens of the thrall, rising before dawn with no name but duty, to the harsh life of Eric the Red, who sailed beyond exile in search of something green, something lasting, through the eerie hush of runes, bones, and gods, where whispers shaped destiny and the veil between worlds felt thinner, and finally, to the feasting tables of the warrior elite, where meat, mead, and memory filled the halls with laughter and legacy. The Norse world was not just one of raids and horns. It was lived in cold mornings and warm hearths, in quiet fears and quiet strength. The rhythm of their lives was steady bound by nature, by honor, by the seasons, by story. And though their gods may be silent now, and their longhouses long since turned to earth and ash, something of them lingers, in place names, in sagas, in the soft way winter wind brushes through evergreens. Tonight, we do not judge their world. We simply sit beside it, observe, listen, and just, perhaps, understand. Because even across centuries and oceans, the lives of ordinary people, however different, still echo faintly in our own. So as you rest now, wrapped in the stillness of your own room, perhaps you feel it too, that quiet thread connecting you to those who came before. The past does not demand anything of you. It simply waits. And so, gently now, let it drift away. Let the cold fjords and smoky halls blur into silence. Sleep, like time, flows softly forward. Imagine you wake before the roosters, not because you want to, but because you must. The sky is still dark. The city of Chang'an, the beating heart of the Tang Empire, sleeps in silence. But already, the palace is stirring. You're not royalty. You're not a courtier. You're a servant, one of hundreds. And your day begins with fear. You sleep on a straw mat in a shared chamber. Your tunic thin against the morning chill. There's no time to stretch. You splash cold water on your face, tie your belt, and hurry through the back corridors before a eunuch catches you lingering. Every moment is measured, every footstep watched. Your job this morning is to assist with your lord's dressing. Silk robes, elaborate sashes, and jade ornaments must be prepared in precise order. The folds must be perfect. The fragrance of his hair oil exactly right. You're not allowed to speak unless spoken to. You keep your eyes lowered. And if his mood is sour, you pray he doesn't take it out on you. Mistakes are punished quickly. A spilled cup of tea, a poorly ironed sleeve, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time might earn you a harsh word or a slap. If you're unlucky, the punishment could be worse bamboo rods across the back of your thighs, a long, silent kneel in the courtyard while others walk past, or demotion to chamber pot duty. And there are rules, endless, shifting rules. You must bow at the right depth depending on rank. Address nobles with the correct honorifics. Never turn your back on a concubine. Never step ahead of a eunuch, and certainly never, ever enter the emperor's inner quarters unless summoned. The hierarchy is suffocating. Eunuchs, though physically altered, wield immense power. They guard the emperor's secrets, control access to the imperial family, and manage the harem. They are gatekeepers, and many enjoy reminding servants like you just how replaceable you are. Some whisper, some shout, others smile as they give cruel orders. Then, there are the concubines. While some are gracious, others are fiercely competitive, fighting for favor and attention. You might be caught in their rivalries, one day delivering a letter, the next being accused of spying. Servants often find themselves punished for things they never said or never meant to say. And still, the work continues. There are floors to scrub, calligraphy tools to prepare, incense to burn, water to boil, scrolls to dust. You may help in the kitchens, sorting rice and slicing vegetables with careful hands. Or you may be sent to the laundry quarters, scrubbing fine fabrics until your knuckles bleed, knowing full well that if the dye runs, the blame will be yours. Midday brings no real rest. You eat quickly, standing or squatting with the other low-ranking servants. Your meal is plain steamed millet or rice, perhaps a few pickled greens. Meat is rare unless you steal it, which you never would. Or at least, you hope you wouldn't. Hunger makes many people forget their morals. By dusk, your feet ache. Your back is tight. The sun paints golden light on the palace eaves, and noble families prepare for evening banquets while you prepare to disappear. Servants are not seen. Not really. You refill wine cups, fan the air, carry trays heavy with roast duck and spring rolls glazed with honey. You clean up spilled soup, bowed low beside laughter that will never belong to you. Some nights, after the nobles retire, you sweep courtyards under moonlight. You polish bronze mirrors that reflect everything but your own worth. You wash the floors of the bathing pavilions, careful not to scratch the tiles. And eventually, you return to your mat. Perhaps someone snores beside you. Perhaps no one speaks. Sleep comes slowly. And before long, the cycle begins again. To be a servant in the Tang court was to vanish slowly, day by day into a system of rank and silence. But even so, even in that hardship, there were small sparks. A shared smile. A few stolen moments in the garden. The faint scent of osmanthus trees blooming in the dark. Bopan. And sometimes, in the rare stillness of dawn, you remember the sound of your mother's voice. From a simpler life, long before the gates of the palace swallowed you whole. Now, let us lift our gaze from the servant's shadows to a figure who cast one of the longest, most controversial shadows of all. Wu Zichen, a name that echoes through history with a strange kind of gravity, both admired and feared, revered and reviled. The only woman in over 2,000 years of imperial Chinese history to rule in her own name, not as empress consort, not as regent, but as sovereign. Her story does not begin on a throne. It begins quietly, far from the heart of power. Wu was born in 624 CE, during the early years of the Tang dynasty. Her family was well-off scholarly, respected but not royal. Still, she was educated, and from a young age, she read classics, learned calligraphy, and studied the subtle art of court behavior. At just 14, she entered the imperial court as a concubine of Emperor Taizong, a minor one, a girl among many. In most cases, this is where a story ends, not where it begins. When Taizong died, Chand, custom dictated that his concubines retire to a Buddhist convent, removed from politics and pleasure alike. Wu followed the rule, but not for long. Here, the story turns. The next emperor, Gaozong Taizong's son, remembered Wu from court. He summoned her back. Some whispered it was her intelligence that caught his eye. Others said it was something colder, a calculated charm, a clever softness. Regardless of why, she returned. And once back inside the palace, Wu Jiao began her long ascent, step by step. She maneuvered through a maze of jealous consorts, suspicious officials, and deadly court politics. She was patient, quiet, watching. And then she struck one infamous story impossible to confirm, but long-repeated claims that to eliminate a rival concubine, Wu murdered her own infant daughter and framed the other woman. It is a grim tale, one hard to believe, but such stories followed her always. Fact or fiction, the result was real. The rival was disgraced. Wu was elevated, and not long after, she became empress. But even that was not enough. When Gaozong's health declined, Wu began to rule in his stead. She issued edicts in his name. She received audiences behind a silk screen, and after his death, instead of stepping aside, she remained. In 690 CE, she declared herself emperor, not regent, not empress dowager, emperor. She founded a new dynasty, the Zhou, and took the throne entirely for herself. It was unprecedented. The traditionalists fumed. Confucian scholars whispered of imbalance, of chaos, of a woman overstepping natural order. But Wu ruled anyway. And she ruled well. She promoted talented people regardless of family background. She expanded the imperial examination system, giving more ordinary men a chance to rise through merit. She strengthened agriculture, built alliances, and oversaw a period of relative peace. She also wielded fear. Secret police monitored dissent. Spies slipped through silk-clad corridors. Opponents vanished, their names scratched from records. Statues were built in her honor. Scrolls declared her divine. And still, her power held. She had lovers even in her 70s. 2 brothers, reportedly young and beautiful, known more for their charms than their counsel. Their presence scandalized the court. But Wu cared little for appearances. She had already rewritten the rules. Eventually, her age caught up with her. Frail, surrounded by scheming ministers, she was persuaded or forced to abdicate. She died in 705 CE. Her reign officially erased by those who followed, but her tomb still remains. At the Channeling Mausoleum, high on a mountain path, her gravestone is unique. It bears no inscription, no name, no deeds. Just a blank tablet. Centuries of historians have filled it with speculation, admiration, condemnation, awe. But perhaps the silence speaks best. Wu Zetian was not easy to define. She was a scholar, a ruler, a mother, a survivor, a woman who carved space for herself in a world that gave her none. Was she ruthless, perhaps? Wise, undeniably. Cold at times. Visionary. Yes. She was not perfect. She was powerful. And that, for many, was unforgivable. But tonight, as we lie still in the hush of distant centuries, we don't need to judge her. We can simply observe, listen, and wonder what it felt like to sit beneath the dragon throne, dressed in yellow silk, holding a brush that could sign a name or end a life. To rule completely alone. And to know, with absolute certainty, that no one else before or since had ever done the same. Let us now descend into the stillness beneath the earth. If you close your eyes and listen closely, you may hear the silence of centuries, the quiet that lingers beneath hills just outside the ancient city of Xi'an. There, under layers of stone, soil, and time, lie the resting places of Tang emperors, sealed chambers, grand tombs, echoes of ambition now tucked beneath mounds shaped like sleeping dragons. We are now in the world of the dead, but not one of horror. one of stillness, of reverence, of mystery. During the height of the Tang dynasty, burial was an art form, a performance, a final act meant to preserve the status of the deceased, display their power, and secure their journey to the afterlife. The tombs were not dug in haste. They were carved deliberately, chambers cut deep into bedrock, sometimes stretching hundreds of feet underground. Whole subterranean palaces were created, where emperors would rest surrounded by what they might need in the next life armor. Horses, treasures, servants, not always living ones, but replicas made from clay and bronze. Imagine walking down the sloping ramp of such a tomb. The light dims. The air becomes cool, thick, and undisturbed. Muffled echoes from your footsteps. And then walls painted with celestial patterns, guardians carved in relief, and solemn statues arranged in ceremonial rows. These tombs are not just graves, they are archives in stone. Take, for instance, the Channeling Mausoleum. It was built for Emperor Gaozong and Empress Wu Zetian, the same woman whose reign we just explored. Unusually, they were buried together, side by side, beneath Liangshan Hill, a low, rounded mountain that seems to cradle the dead without fanfare. The tomb has never been excavated. Out of respect, out of fear, out of a cultural choice to let the emperors sleep undisturbed. And so it remains sealed. But others have been opened, and they tell us stories. At another Tang tomb, archaeologists uncovered exquisite murals along winding panels that show court ladies riding horseback, servants carrying parasols, and musicians mid-performance. These were not idealized figures. They had weight, expression, movement. They were real. From these quiet pictures, we see how people dressed, what they ate, how they entertained themselves. We see the rhythm of Tang life preserved not in words, but in brushstrokes made more than 1,000 years ago. In some tombs, rows of pottery figurines line the chamber walls, soldiers in armor, dancers mid-spin, camels laden with goods from the Silk Road. Each one placed with intention, not simply decoration, but echoes of the emperors reached the far corners of the empire brought into a single resting space. And yet, for all we've seen, so much remains hidden. Many Tang tombs have not been disturbed at all. Some are known only by faint hill shapes visible from satellite imagery. Others are suspected but unconfirmed, rumored to hold forgotten emperors, cursed treasures, or secrets of vanished dynasties. The question lingers, should we open them? It is a modern dilemma. Science urges us forward, promising knowledge, cultural insight, even beauty. But tradition holds us back. To dig is to disturb. To disturb is to dishonor. And in Chinese culture, ancestor veneration runs deep. So the hills remain silent, their contents imagined, guarded by superstition and time. Sometimes it's better not to know. Sometimes the mystery is the story. Still, above these tombs, the seasons pass. Wind rustles through pine trees planted 1,000 years ago. Birds land atop mossy stone guardians, shaped like lions and rams and dragons. Tourists take photos. Locals walk paths lined with ancient tiles, unaware that beneath their feet lie emperors, empresses, and endless stories waiting in darkness. We live in cities that rest on older cities. Our daily lives unfold over forgotten rituals, forgotten fears, but they are never truly gone, not entirely. They whisper. And as you lie still now, perhaps you can sense it too, that quiet heartbeat beneath history, that long breath of centuries passing without sound. In the end, a tomb is more than a grave. It is a hope that someone will remember, that someone will care, that long after the body has turned to dust, the name, the face, the life will matter. Tonight, we honor that hope, gently, silently. Let it lull you now, like the hush of soil covering stone. Let us now rise from the tombs and step lightly into a courtyard bathed in moonlight. Here, the air smells faintly of plum blossoms. Wind chimes whisper in the breeze. And beyond a bamboo screen, a circle of robed men and women recline on low benches, sipping warm tea from porcelain cups. You've entered the other side of Tang life. Not the back halls of servitude, nor the stone silence of death, but the rarefied realm of the elite. Scholars, poets, nobles, those who lived not by labor, but by leisure, status, and cultivated taste. Their lives, too, followed a rhythm. But it was softer, looser, woven with ritual and refinement. Imagine waking in a spacious private home, your pillow embroidered with clouds, your sheets dyed with saffron. Servants slide open your window screens. Outside, the garden stirs with bird song and the soft rustle of silk robes among peonies. You do not rush. You rise slowly. Morning begins with calligraphy practice. Ink and brush, a quiet discipline that clears the mind. You copy ancient verses, perfecting the gentle sweep of each character. Writing, in Tang society, is not only a skill, it's an identity. Then tea, not just a drink, but an art form. Leaves are carefully measured, water boiled to the perfect temperature, poured with grace. You drink not only for taste, but for stillness, for harmony between body and spirit. Perhaps you stroll the garden afterward. The paths are paved with polished stone. A koi pond glints in the sunlight. Flowers bloom in quiet clusters, chrysanthemums, orchids, bamboo, all symbols of virtue. By midday, you might receive guests. Not for politics, for poetry. The Tang elite prized literary gathering salons where art was shared like wine. One might compose a spontaneous verse while watching cranes fly overhead. Another might recite from memory, letting the cadence lull the group into thoughtful silence. At some gatherings, poems were floated down streams on cups of wine. If the cup stopped before reaching you, it was your turn to compose a line. A game, but a sacred one. To be clever, but graceful. To reveal yourself, yet still remain composed. These salons were not only for men. Educated women, too, took part in Tang cultural life. Courtesans were often skilled poets and musicians. Some noble women were known for their writing, their calligraphy, their fashion. Beauty was not only in appearance, it was in restraint, language, and presence. Meals were elegant, though not excessive. Delicate dumplings, fish steamed with ginger, seasonal fruit served with chilled wine. Meals were slow, interspersed with conversation. Music played on the guqin or bamboo flute. In the evening, the city of Chang'an glowed softly with lanterns. The elite walked along pleasure streets, browsed silk shops, or visited temples to light incense. Some returned home to quiet pavilions, others to secluded gatherings where soft laughter and soft music stretched long into the night. Even in leisure, there were rituals: arranging flowers, burning incense, writing letters in scented ink. These small acts were seen as reflections of inner cultivation, of one's ability to turn the ordinary into something elegant. And yet, for all its refinement, the Tang elite's world was fragile. A single political misstep could lead to exile. A poem misunderstood could be seen as rebellion. The emperor's favor was unpredictable. The weather, more so. Famine, flood, or war could erase comfort in a season. And so, the elite clung to beauty, to moments, to the fleeting elegance of a falling petal or a perfectly balanced verse. They lived with awareness of impermanence, of time. Their favorite poems often whispered of passing things, the changing moon, the sound of a distant flute, the memory of spring. It wasn't all about wealth or display. It was about feeling life fully, but gently. Even now, those poems remain, preserved in anthologies, carved into stone, remembered by school children and scholars alike. Their voices still echo, softly, carefully, timelessly. And so, as we leave the banquet halls and garden paths of the Tang elite, perhaps we carry something with us, a sense that beauty does not always shout, that stillness can be strength, that history, at its most refined, can feel like poetry itself. Let that feeling settle with you now, like falling dusk. You are safe here, carried by words, through centuries of thought, into stillness. Shuffled in lines, spoken to like cattle, measured only by how obedient they remained. Still, small kindnesses sometimes bloom. A shared smile over laundry, a song hummed in the sewing room, an older woman passing an extra crust to a hungry child. Humanity does not vanish easily, even when crushed. By the late 19th century, reforms softened some edges. Conditions improved slightly, but the damage lingered. The stigma, the fear, the quiet terror of ending up back behind those walls. Even today, in parts of Britain, the phrase going to the workhouse still holds weight. A whisper from the past, a warning. So, as you lie here now in warmth, in comfort, imagine the strength it took to endure such days, to rise again each morning, to find meaning in repetition, to hold on to hope with hands cracked and shaking. The workhouse was not a prison, but it was never a home. It was a holding pen for lives deemed unworthy of softness. And yet, they survived. Imagine, for a moment, being born into a world where your skills are praised, but your skin is questioned, where your bravery is real, but history refuses to record it, where you show up to help again and again and are told, politely, to leave. Now, imagine you help anyway. This was Mary Seacole. She was born in 1805 in Kingston, Jamaica. Her mother was a free woman of color, her father a Scottish soldier. In the British Empire's tangled system of race and class, Mary existed somewhere in between, never fully belonging anywhere. She learned medicine not from books, but from watching her mother. Theirs was a boarding house, but also a place of healing, especially for sick soldiers. Herbs, baths, poultices. Mary absorbed it all, layer by layer, day by day. She had a gift for care, and an even greater one for persistence. As a young woman, she traveled to London, to the Caribbean, to Panama. She opened clinics, treated fevers, cared for the desperate and the dying not as a nurse in a white gown, but as a woman in a worn dress, sleeves rolled up, moving quietly from bed to bed. When the Crimean War broke out in 1853, Mary felt a calling. Thousands of British soldiers were falling ill, not just from bullets, but from cholera, dysentery, exhaustion. She packed her supplies, her experience, and her deep compassion, and sailed for England, hoping to join the official nursing corps. She was turned away more than once. Letters of application, personal visits, recommendations, all rejected. She was told there was no place for her, that they didn't need her help. But Mary didn't wait for permission. She paid her own way to Crimeas. There, near the battlefield, she built something extraordinary, a small wooden building known as the British Hotel. It wasn't a hotel in the modern sense, but a sanctuary, a mix of store, mess hall, rest stop, and clinic. She offered warm meals, clean bandages, and a safe place to recover. Officers and ordinary soldiers alike came to her door, some just to talk, others for healing. Some came because they'd heard about the woman with a ready smile and steady hands. Mary walked the battlefield too. She didn't wear a red cross or carry a weapon, but she went where the wounded fell, her skirts heavy with mud, her apron stained, her voice low and even, comforting men who knew they might not live to see another sunrise. They called her Mother Sea Coal. She brought not just medicine, but presence, warmth when the war was cold, laughter when spirits broke. And when peace returned, she returned too, only to find herself forgotten. While Florence Nightingale became a household name, Mary faded into the footnotes. She was not bitter, only puzzled. She had done the same work, risked the same dangers, but she was not part of the story they told. Still, she remained proud. In 1857, her friends and supporters helped publish her autobiography, The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Sea Coal in Many Lands. In it, her voice is direct, calm, and clear. She shares her travels, her trials, her joys, not as a victim, but as a woman who did what she believed was right. For decades, her grave grew quiet. Then, slowly, people began to remember. Scholars found her memoir. Activists raised funds for a statue. Her name began appearing beside Florence Nightingale's, not as competition, but as recognition. Two women, two paths, one war. Both answered the call. Mary Seacole's story isn't loud. It doesn't flash or clamor. It lives in the slow, steady rhythm of a woman walking into danger, not for glory, but because someone had to. Because care is a quiet form of courage. And because history, when allowed to widen its lens, finds those who've been waiting in the margins. So tonight, let Mary's story be part of your rest. A reminder that compassion doesn't always wear medals, that healing comes in many forms, and that every act of kindness, no matter how small, adds light to the dark. As your eyes grow heavier, imagine her figure walking through the dim light of a military camp, a kerosene lantern in one hand, a tin of broth in the other, the wind cold, her footsteps steady, her voice soft. She is not waiting to be remembered. She is simply helping again. What? Picture yourself in London, 1888. The gas lamps flicker through thick fog. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick with rain. Somewhere nearby, a carriage clatters past, its wheels echoing down narrow alleys. The city does not sleep, but it rarely rests. This is Whitechapel, a working-class district in East London, cramped, overcrowded, teetering under the weight of poverty, disease, and desperation. Here, buildings lean in on each other like tired shoulders. Tenements rise over busy streets. Lodging houses charge by the night, and the alleys. They twist like veins worn, cluttered, and too many of them unnamed. The smells hang heavy, coal smoke, boiled cabbage, horse droppings, human waste, and beneath it all, something fainter fear. In the late summer of that year, the fear sharpened. A series of murders began, always in the early hours, always brutal, always women, poor and vulnerable, found in the darkness, their lives taken swiftly and savagely. But this is not a story of violence. It's a story of silence, of confusion, of unanswered questions. The name Jack the Ripper would not appear until later, scrawled in red ink across a taunting letter sent to newspapers. Its authenticity is debated to this day. But the name stuck. It carved itself into memory like a shadow that wouldn't lift. The victims had names too. Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. Each one had a story, a past, a life before they became statistics. Some were mothers, others wives. Many worked when and where they could, in a time when being poor and female often meant being disposable. The city took little notice until the pattern emerged. The police were under pressure. The press swarmed. Rumors spread faster than facts. Suspects were named and discarded. Witnesses contradicted one another. Evidence was mishandled or never collected. There were no fingerprints yet, no DNA, no CCTV, just boots on muddy ground, lanterns in the night. Scotland Yard was baffled. The killer seemed to vanish between alleys, moving like smoke, leaving horror behind but no trail. Hundreds were questioned. Letters poured in, some from pranksters, others from terrified citizens. The city watched itself unravel. And yet, the case went cold. The official investigation led to nothing conclusive. The murder stopped or changed shape. People moved on, though never truly forgot. To this day, no one knows who he was. Was it a butcher, a doctor, a local, a foreigner, a madman, or someone entirely ordinary, hidden in plain sight? Modern theories abound. Books have been written, names put forth, some compelling, others far-fetched. But every time one thread seems promising, it frays. What remains certain is the setting. Whitechapel itself was part of the mystery. It was a place with too many people, too little light, and no safety net. A place where women walked alone because they had no other choice, where cries for help were common and often ignored. The fear that gripped the district wasn't just fear of the killer. It was fear of being invisible, of being unheard. After the last known murder, the fog returned to ordinary thickness. The papers moved on to other stories. The police closed files. And the city kept moving. But not forgetting. Over time, the Ripper became legend, then myth, then commodity, tours, novels, films. His name grew louder than those he silenced. But here, in this space, we remember differently. Slowly. Quietly. We walk the cobblestones not to chase a phantom, but to understand the world that let him disappear. The dark alleys, the desperation, the way poverty shadows people until even their disappearances seem expected. So, as you rest, picture the gaslight again. See it glow softly through mist. Imagine the footsteps, the quiet hush of the city at night, the creak of wood, the clink of a constable's boots, the rustle of fabric in the wind. Nothing stirs too loudly. The questions linger, but they do not demand answers. This is a city of echoes. And tonight, those echoes fade gently into silence. Imagine waking not to the cold stone of a workhouse floor, nor to the rattle of Whitechapel's market carts, but to the soft hush of a well-drawn curtain. A feather-stuffed mattress beneath you, the gentle tick of a long-case clock in the hallway. Outside, mist rolls slowly across a well-manicured lawn. You are upstairs now, literally and socially. This is the home of a Victorian nobleman. The great country estates of 19th century Britain were more than just homes, Paul. They were symbols of wealth, of legacy, of permanence in a world rapidly industrializing. The house itself was often older than its inhabitants, passed down through generations with titles and land deeds, and its rhythms were slow, purposefully so. Breakfast was quiet, often served in one's room, a silver tray, fresh tea, buttered toast, perhaps a boiled egg served soft, the curtains drawn only partially, letting in a muted gray light filtered through frost or rain. Below stairs, a flurry of quiet labor made it all possible. Upstairs, time was measured by leisure. After breakfast, the day might begin with correspondence. A gentleman would write letters in his study, seated at a mahogany desk. his fountain pen scratching against thick paper, the fireplace flickering, the butler silent, waiting for instructions. His wife might tend to the garden design, or review the household accounts alongside the housekeeper. Sometimes, the lady of the house embroidered in silence or practiced piano. The home was serene but ruled by unspoken codes, especially for women. Everything had a place. Everyone had a role. Afternoons were reserved for social rituals. Perhaps a ride through the countryside, the sound of hooves soft against the muddy lane, or a walk along a clipped hedge maze, arms tucked behind the back, exchanging pleasantries about the weather or parliamentary affairs. Tea was more than a drink, it was an event, poured from bone china pots into delicate cups. Scones with clotted cream, jam laid neatly on white linen. Conversation was expected to remain light, yet sharp. A good host made it seem effortless. Dinner, of course, was the crown jewel. At least 7 courses: oysters, soup, roast fowl, pudding, port. The meal began with the ring of a bell. Footmen entered in pairs, gliding silently across parquet floors. Candles reflected off crystal glassware. Cutlery gleamed beside hand-stitched place cards. It was all theater. And behind every curtain, someone unseen cued the act. The kitchen, of course, was no less bustling than the dining room was serene. Roast basted, sauces stirred, potatoes peeled by hand. The scullery maid stood on aching feet. The cook shouted once and only once. Everything had to be exact. The lord might raise a glass and offer a toast. A visiting vicar might laugh too loudly. A young cousin might drop his spoon. The clink echoed, then passed. Later, in the drawing room, cigars were lit, parlor games played. Someone might sit at the pianoforte, and the soft notes would drift like smoke up to the rafters. And when the guests were gone, silence returned. The manor at night was quiet, save for the occasional creak of timber or the call of a barn owl beyond the window panes. Candles dimmed, coals banked, a maid tiptoed upstairs with a warming pan. Even here where privilege bloomed, there was rituals. The day closed not with exhaustion, but with formality. Slippers placed by the hearth, books closed with a sigh, a final glance out the window at a land that was yours, but only for a time. And still, despite the beauty, it was not freedom. Even noblemen had duties to Parliament, to landowners, to social reputation. Daughters were married for alliances, sons sent to schools where cold water and Latin awaited. Appearances were everything, and indulgence was always balanced with expectation. To walk those halls was to carry the weight of inheritance. To live in elegance, but not always ease. And yet, the quiet wealth of a manor was a world apart from the tenement, the factory floor, or the workhouse. These were rooms filled with oil paintings and velvet, where silence wasn't loneliness, it was luxury. So as we near the end of our journey tonight, imagine the stillness of those vast corridors. Picture a candelabra flickering gently on the landing. Hear the faint click of a door latch, the rustle of satin slippers retreating into shadow. The house breathes, but barely. It holds its secrets quietly, just like the city beyond. Hey, Guy. If you're still with me, gently resting or perhaps already adrift in dreams, let's take a slow breath together, one more soft step through the passageways of time before we part for the night. We began in the bleak stone corridors of the Victorian workhouse, a place where survival stripped away dignity, where families were separated not by choice, but by system. We imagined the rough wool of uniforms, the scrape of empty bowls, and the quiet sorrow of institutional life. There, poverty was not just a condition, it was treated as a moral failing. Then we walked beside Mary Seacole, a woman whose courage met walls of prejudice. Her hands, stained with medicine and compassion, moved through war zones with calm resolve. She taught us that history often forgets the ones who did the most quietly, those who healed instead of conquered, who served instead of ruled. From there, we moved into the fog-draped alleys of Whitechapel. Among the flickering lamps and silent fear, we found a story with no resolution, only echoes. Jack the Ripper's London was not just a crime scene. It was a reflection of a society that looked away from the vulnerable until their suffering screamed too loudly. And even then, only some were heard. Finally, we ascended into the warmth of the noble manor, silver polished, fires lit, footsteps muffled by Persian rugs. It was a different world, but not a perfect one. Even there, among silks and starlit dinners, people were shaped by the same invisible hands of duty, expectation, and class. What ties it all together is not just the era, but the human condition within it. Whether bent beneath the weight of poverty or rising under the burden of legacy, the people of Victorian England lived within a world of sharp divisions and quiet endurance. Most did not make history, but they made tea, they swept floors, they fought for recognition, they hoped, they mourned. They pressed forward with whatever strength they could muster. And in some small way, perhaps that is not so different from us. As your mind rests now, perhaps cradled by the rhythm of your own breath, remember this: the past is not so distant. It whispers through the stories we choose to remember, through the names we repeat, through the quiet recognition of those who lived and struggled and hoped for comfort just as you might now. So let the stillness of history wrap around you like a soft woolen shawl. The gas lights have dimmed, the carriages have gone quiet, the manor's windows are dark. Sleep now, knowing that you've wandered through another world and returned, gently, to your own. Good night.